Rintoul, who is the founder of Mind's Eye, working on novel ways to interface with the brain and body.
Hello,
Prior to
everyone.
this, she garnered a PhD in neurotechnology with a background in biosensor wearables and medical devices. She'll be giving her talk titled Spectra, Portable and Open Medical Imaging, How Far Towards Diagnostics Can It Go? She'll say the title better. All right, with that, I'll give it to you.
Great. Hi, everybody. So I'm going to talk about a project that I started some time ago. This is some older slides. Is there a newer version? But this would be fine otherwise. So basically, imagine a world where medical imaging was easily accessible to everybody. Basically, 2/3 of the world doesn't have access to medical imaging. It's a lot of people. It would also be neat if we could, even in a first world country, use medical imaging preventatively instead of when we think something has gone wrong already. We've got MRI, which is very expensive, helium quenching chamber. It's wonderful that they've got the MRI for all, but we've also got a CT scanner, which is based on X-rays, sending them through different angles, which measures something slightly different to what an MRI measures. Ultrasound was still expensive, about $80K for a medical grade system, and of course EEG, which for a diagnostic level clinical grade system is also K plus. So why make medical imaging in general more accessible? Well, if we can look at computing, where it started being the size of a room, and then in came the desktop computer, that really changed how people interacted. Everybody could now interact with computers. And I think this is what actually brought about this computing revolution, is that we were able to shrink the technology and make it available, democratize it. Then we shrank it some more and we all have one in our pockets in the form of a smartphone. So if we take a step back and imagine we could do the same thing with medical imaging, an MRI, yes, it takes up more than a room because it also has a helium quenching chamber, it has dedicated personnel. It's really big. But what if there was something small and portable that let everybody do medical imaging? I mean, we've already got TV shows like Star Trek when the tricorder, the sort of good for everything health diagnostic device. But so far, that's just a dream. So basically, what would happen if there was a safe form of medical imaging that people could hack with and improve? So I came to this actually from a failed startup. I'll just put that out there. So me and two other co-founders, we got into this accelerator called HACS. We made a bioimpedance spectroscopy device that measures how full your bladder is, aimed at people that have neurogenic bladder disorder, which is people who have paralysis or have had surgery so that the nerves in their bladder can no longer tell them when they need to go to the bathroom. It was meant to be a wellness device so that it would have an accelerated path to market. But something went wrong. Although it worked, we started to go through this FDA process, and positioning it as a wellness device was not okay. It was perfectly safe to use. It's within the IEC 601-1 guidelines for safe use in humans. It's external. It's not even an implantable. However, because it's to be used on people who have a medical condition, people who can't fill their bladder, that makes it a medical device. So this put our small startup in a very different position. So we now started conversations with the FDA, and they wanted, first of all, nobody had done this before, so it was a de novo device, which means it hasn't been put into one of the class 1, 2, 3, or 4 type medical devices yet. And then next, they wanted long-term trials. And we thought, wow, long-term trials, like 5 to 10 years. It was really nice that Accelerator gave us $100K that all 3 of us could share and build a device with, but that's just, not really going to cover it. So anyway, so I went off and I got another job, and I kept hacking on this bioimpedance spectroscopy device on the side. And that's how Spectra was born. So Spectra is an open source electrical impedance tomography device. Electrical impedance tomography is very small. All the parts are very low cost, so it can be quite easily mass produced. And what it does is it can image through a cross section of material. The material has to be conductive, being the only quality that you need. And obviously our bodies are 80% water, that makes us conductive. So here is an example where we're reconstructing an image in a tank filled with water. So you can see a cup moving around and the image is able to be reconstructed. Similarly, here's 2 cups there. And you can see it can reconstruct an image of those 2 cups inside this tank. So the way that it works is that you send a sine wave, an AC signal, through the medium, and based on the qualities of the medium, whether there's fat, muscle, a tumor, in this case, a cucumber or a carrot, they have different material qualities, and the current will go a slightly different path based on the relative impedances. So if you do that and you send it through at different angles, you can reconstruct an image. So the way that this works is that you send out a current and you measure it on the other side, and it will have lost a bit of energy, it would have been attenuated a bit. Then you send through another current and it will have lost a little bit of energy if it goes through at a different angle, but it will be a bit different at each of the different angles that you send it through at. And you do this for all these different angles, kind of in a circle, and you use something called the radon transform, which is what they use in CT scanners. So this is the same technology that is used in CT scanners, which is an interesting thing because you could then learn about that technology, you see. Whereas it's probably very hard to just play with a CT scanner in your spare time right now. Also, they're ionizing radiation. Wouldn't recommend it, not good for you. So you use this and you can reconstruct an image, and this is how you do it with the current. So you can see you inject the current, and then you measure it from all of the other electrodes, and then you move over the current one and you measure it from all of the electrodes, and using that you can reconstruct an image. So here's an example of Spectra and lung imaging. So this is one of the classic use cases of electrical impedance tomography, which has been around for quite a while, by the way. So lung perfusion imaging, basically looking at air which is non-conductive, filling in your lungs, and how your lungs expand and contract. Now, the resolution of this image isn't very high, you might notice. But that's okay. If you remember, in 1977, in the first MRI scan, it looked like this, pretty low resolution. And then an ERT scan, pretty low resolution, but you can still kind of see that there's some lungs there. And we've come a long way with MRI. This is a scan actually of my brain, and it's so much better than what it used to be. So the question is, can we do the same with EIT? It would take some effort, but because it's so small and mass producible, surely that would be worthwhile. The other thing that it can do is impedance spectroscopy. So this is a massively underutilized technique, in my opinion. So basically, you send through frequencies, a range of different frequencies. And what you can see here on this part here is that if I put an apple and a sweet potato in a bath of water, and I measured their spectrum, and you can see that the apple and the sweet potato have a different spectrum to one another. But what's even more interesting, that spectrum remains the same over subsequent days. So it's kind of like, yes, the apple and the sweet potato are constantly different in the same way. So this is important. If we imagined that we replaced that apple and a sweet potato with cancerous tissue, or something else that we wanted to find, a liver abnormality, kidney stones, something that we want to search where we want to measure a material difference. And we can also, this is just 8 electrode EIT, bit lesser. I did a basic machine learning algorithm over this. I think it was k-means clustering. And based on the spectrum, it can classify the apple, the sweet potato, and the apple and the sweet potato together correctly, which I think is kind of interesting. If you could get this to a bit of a high resolution, you've got this pretty accurate material identifier. So this project actually started quite a while ago. It actually started around 2017. I did a presentation at a hacker conference in Germany of the first 8 electrode design. I beefed it up to a 32 electrode design and showed it at DEF CON and Biohacking Village. Then there was a Hackaday Super Conference, IEEE Brain. I did a crowdfunding campaign for it and delivered it to over 100 backers. So it succeeded. And then it won this Accessible Science Tools Award from the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, which was very helpful. So it came quite a way. However, I wasn't sure that it was really, that this was sort of something that I was thinking, this is really awesome, but I'm not really sure where it's going here. And I ended up deciding to start a PhD, which I've just finished. So I disappeared off into PhD land. And now I've reappeared, hi. But I kept selling it. I wasn't advertising it. While the first few years of the PhD before a part supply shortage occurred during the COVID pandemic. But I think it's interesting to see what effect this device has had and who's using it. A GI doctor in New Zealand who's monitoring gastric emptying, a prosthetics lab wanting better gestural control so you can get a cross-section of your wrist to see muscle movement, a dentist wanting to replace x-ray machines for cavity detection. That's a great idea. There's a startup that got one. They want to do embryo analysis for bovine in vitro embryo production as a proxy for later human in vitro embryo analysis, but bovine in vitro embryo production is a massive industry, which I wasn't aware of until I met them. Sleep apnea analysis for the throat. So in this case, you stick the electrodes on your throat. Cerebrospinal fluid for measuring intracranial pressure post-neurosurgery. A body and fat analysis tool. This is like an oldie but a goodie, like the bioimpedance scales that people use to measure fat mass versus muscle mass. Deep vein thrombosis monitoring. Fertility prediction, another startup, KEG. Lung perfusion monitoring for pulmonary embolism. So there's a few different labs that are looking at this application for EIT. That was University College London. And then there was another startup, Pathfinder Medical, for advanced fistula creation for dialysis. So this is there's a lot, many more, hundreds more as well. So I think this is kind of interesting that it can be used for so many different things. And I felt good about it momentarily. Encouraging innovation and the acceleration of health technologies. And then I put a question mark. Because we're not actually impacting patients. There's no patients. So there's no diagnostics. There's no actual diagnosis. This isn't really having an impact. I mean, it is having an impact. Our labs are buying it. That's good. It's better. It's very good. It's wonderful. It's gone through no formal safety qualifications. Those are expensive. And it comes with a little phantom for you to use and experiment with. And if you want to put it on your body, you're doing that at your own risk. It has to be like that. Otherwise, it would need to have gone through a lot more certification to sell it. So there's limited funding to continue or support the acceleration of development of a tool like this. And that means that we don't benefit from the end use case of helping patients, nor do patients benefit. And nor do VCs really love funding medical imaging innovation, and I can explain why that is. Basically, pharmaceuticals has a similar path to market, yet it has much bigger returns. So medical devices in general aren't popular to fund, just as a full stop item. And this is going to flow back all the way through into healthcare considerations. And I think that's just interesting to think about it, because it's actually just a general problem in innovation in healthcare, medical devices in general. And this is a travesty of human health. This is like I think we could talk about the Hippocratic Oath and all the missed opportunities of preserving people's health that we're missing out on here. So let's have a look at what the venture model for medical devices is and how you actually get a medical device to patients. This is where it's meant to do the good. So basically, there's a limited appetite for technical risk, and you need an IP moat to get venture capital. So you need to narrow down to a single diagnostic application right at the beginning. I've already gone far wrong. Okay, far wrong. Look at this, so far. Okay, so single diagnostic application, narrow as possible. And that's sort of sad because it could be used for so many other things. And then you should do clinical trials on that single diagnostic clinical application. That could take quite a while, 5 years. So you don't really innovate. You don't have a time to refine. You've just picked something that can be fast relatively to market, and you have to shut down the technical development and innovation so that you can get through those clinical trials. So that means that we're not really experimenting at any stage in medical devices. We're not exploring how to make them better. There's something wrong there. So insurance reimbursements, that can take about as long as clinical trials. So now you have the regulatory and IP moat that you need. And maybe in 10 years, if you're lucky, you can generate some returns for the people who have invested in this company. So this is the model that we're looking at. This is how you actually get to patients. If you're not doing this, you can't diagnose anything. And you can't really take it to patients. So that's a problem. And I thought to just contrast it, to consider the development pathway of MRI. I love MRI. MRI is really cool. 1952, the Nobel Prize, but basically material science applications. They did a whole bunch of different things, enabling spatial specificity, the conversion into images. You can see all of this basic innovation, basic physics work that's occurred. And this is very important because it wasn't used medically initially. And then it didn't have anything to do with medical care. In 1983, Siemens installed the first MRI at Hanover Medical School. And from that point forward, it went through a series of clinical trials and rolled out to more and more hospitals and continued being technically refined. But this is over a period of 60 years. That's quite a while. And clearly, it's had quite a long time where it's been in this experimental development phase. So now I'm going to scoot back to open source healthware and sustainability for long-term impact. So this EIT device, it's unable to have impact on patients because of these regulatory hurdles. There's all these other certifications that it would also need, like to be produced in ISO 13485 compliant factory and ISO 60601-1, and there's all sorts of other things as well. So longevity of projects, does the development end? So when people get these grants to develop open source, another problem is that to get a medical device all the way through to helping people, I think it's about a 10-year time frame roughly. Does the development end at the end of a grant? Or how do we sustain these innovations that you guys are coming up with and keep them going? There's minimal funding support after that. And you need funding support for usability, maintenance, UX, tutorial development, training and support, technology iteration, manufacturing and distribution. So these are all things past the novelty stage. So this is past the point where you've written an article, which is where most of the scientific energy goes into, which is wonderful. And there is definitely a great place for that. And that's very important. But it also you need to do these other things to get it out there. Upsides, interesting and fun collaborations, and you get early feedback, which is wonderful, and you can get it across a broad range of applications instead of just one clinical indication. That means that you can be fast to market, bypass the longer regulatory hurdles, as long as you've limited your risk appropriately. So you have to find a way to not be going past any of the limits that would otherwise be set. And obviously it helps other people in medical devices to help and improve access. So I think there is value in this. And the value is actually in encouraging other people to innovate in medical devices, which is otherwise very hard to innovate in because of this kind of very narrow timeline which we're subject to. And just to bring up the people on the other side of the equation, which is wearables. Apple has a lot of money, yet still it's very limited in what it's actually diagnosing. It has to say it's inconclusive a lot of the time. So a problem with diagnostics is if you're correct 98% of the time, that's not enough, because you're legally liable for that 2% that you're wrong. So there's a very fine line to negotiate around. There was a company called Whoop that did a blood pressure monitoring wristwatch, which looks really cool. And it was marketing its blood pressure monitoring as a kind of wellness metric, which also sounds interesting to track and potentially very useful for many people. But that too, you're not really allowed to expose to people, which is, in my opinion, a bit sad, because this is information about our bodies, and this is just how our bodies are, and we should be able to interpret that information how we wish. So there's some problems there. So what are my future plans? So basically, a revision. I'd love to do a revision of the EIT kit. Basically taking the user feedback on board that I've got by having different people use it. And I'd also love to do a new prototype based on my PhD work on this other form of imaging called acousto-electric imaging. So thank you, everybody. I'd like to say that there's a GitHub repository. You can look at tutorials, openeit.github.io, contributors, discussion forums on there. Got a mailing list that you can sign up to with over 1,000 subscribers, active Discord community chat, and I'd like to say thanks to everybody who's been involved. Yep, thank you.